Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on the Oracle Broadcasting Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. We're talking about human psychopathy. What is a psychopath? What are their identifying personality characteristics? What is the difference between primary and secondary psychopathy? And at a future point, we'll look at speculation on why psychopathy even exists at all. That'll be for another time. I want to get back into the identifying characteristics of psychopathy. We talked about pathological lying. We talked about a severely distorted sense of the consequences of their own behavior, of their own actions. Now, here's another one is the total failure to accept any personal responsibility. Okay, that goes hand in hand with the distorted sense of the consequences of their own behavior. They have a strong belief that they'll never be brought to justice. Okay, contempt for other people, for their will to do anything about it. They think they'll continue to abuse others endlessly, and no one will ever do anything about it. And let me just emphatically state this here on the air under no uncertain terms. They are wrong. Very wrong. Just so that is stated for the record, you're incorrect about that. They will be brought to justice. And I would like to see them brought to justice here in the physical domain. Regardless, they're going to be brought to justice, one way or another. But I think we should bring them to justice. The people who do truly have the ability and the capacity to feel and to know right from wrong and to know truth. I feel that's our responsibility. We have an ability to respond to this condition. And it would be right for us to respond to it. It would be right for us to do what is necessary to purge this condition from humanity once and for all. And I think we need to do that by working with people who are either in or on the borderline of secondary psychopathy constantly. In a one-to-one basis if necessary, or in a group setting if necessary. To bring them in some form out of this cult that they're a member of that keeps them psychopathic, regardless of what institution it is, military, police, government, banking, etc. Education, medicine. These are all cults. For all intents and purposes, they are operational cults that only care about their own continuation, the continuation of their own existence, their own survival. And all they're doing is continuing to condition people to get them to comply behaviorally with the factors that are necessary for the institution's survival, regardless of who is being harmed in the process. And that's more characteristics of a psychopath. The survival of themselves and their agenda is paramount to everything else. And that's the number one tenet of all dark occultism. Satanism, dark Luciferianism, the number one agenda. Satanism, dark Luciferianism, dark Kabbalism, dark Masonry. Every one of these things, the number one thing is self-preservation above all else. Survival. No matter who needs to be harmed in the process, I go forward. Whether I'm doing what's right or wrong or not. If I'm doing what's wrong, it doesn't make a difference. Regardless of what has to be done, I go forward, and self-preservation is my highest instinct. Which again is an animal instinct. That's not. People think, oh, that's human instinct, that's human nature. No, that's animal instinct. That's animal nature. And people will say, well, human beings are just another animal. There's where you're wrong again. Human beings are not just another animal. Human beings are an animal with a capacity to grow to so much more than that base animalistic nature, because we have more than one type of nature. There is an animal nature that dwells within us, but that doesn't have to rule. We have to develop a true human nature. And people confuse that with our condition. Nature and condition are not the same thing. We need to develop true human nature. The current human condition has nothing to do with human nature. It has to do with animal nature that is ruling the human condition. I hope people can grasp that and grasp what I just said to you. Really sit and think about it. So, one characteristic I haven't gotten to is perhaps the most important. Okay? Psychopaths have the ability to feign, to fake the normal human emotions, even though they're not really feeling them. This is because they grew up with this condition. A primary psychopath grew up with this condition. When they were young, they interacted with people and recognized very early in life that they were different, drastically different than other people. And they knew that if they were exposed as being completely different, they would be recognized for being something that is less than human. Or in other words, being a full animal, having no true human nature, looking as a human, having the guise of a human, being able to walk, breathe, talk, like a human being, but really not being human. They recognized they were something other than a normal human being. Another species, if you will. And in order to go through life unrecognized, to hide in plain sight, if you will, they became very, very good actors. They watched normal human emotion, at displays of normal emotion in context, in society, and then practice that, literally practice it, to try to fake it. And, I would go so far as to say, if you're thinking, well, what did they do? Stand in front of a mirror and actually practice different emotional responses? Yes. They actually did that and may still actually do that. They practice literally to try to make their responses as genuine seeming as possible, when in fact, in the heart, they feel nothing. In the body, there is no physiological response going on, and there's a reason for that. The part of the brain that actually generates the ability for the physiology to feel emotional responses in the body when certain conditions are present, when certain situations are taking place, that part of the brain that puts those neuropeptides and neurotransmitters into the bloodstream, okay, is not functioning properly in the psychopath. And in the case of the primary psychopath, that part of the brain is actually broken from birth. It is not functioning. This is the limbic brain. The midbrain, the middle chamber, as it is called in the esoteric sense, is not functioning. Now, we could speculate about why that's the case, but in the case of the primary psychopath, it's important simply to understand that that condition exists from birth. In the secondary psychopath, the same basic thing is taking place, but it is because the being, through their conditioning and through their bad choices, okay, and not working with the brain, not working with the psyche, not doing psychic cleansing to clean and maintain sanity, sanitized conditions within the psyche, okay, that part of the brain has atrophied. The midbrain has actually atrophied. And the R complex of the brain is actually ruling the individual. And this also happens because the left brain is chronically overengaged, and the right brain, creative thinking, heuristic thinking, in other words, big picture thinking, has not been engaged. Somebody has only focused on individual physical tasks, everyday physical tasks that they need to do for, here's the word here, survival. That's all they've been focused on. They haven't been focused on any abstract thinking. They haven't been focused on anything creative. Music hasn't been a part of their life. Art hasn't been a part of their life. They're only about money. I need money to survive. So I got to do this physical task to survive, and that's all my entire existence is about. That's the path to becoming a psychopath. A secondary psychopath. I want to constantly reemphasize the difference between the two. You have to get clear about the difference. That a secondary psychopath is created through conditions and factors in life. In other words, the culture creates the secondary psychopath. The culture that they're in, the cult that they're in, that they're identified with, that they believe in unquestioningly. You can break them outside of the cult, sure, then you can change the thought patterning and conditioning that created the secondary psychopathic condition. I don't care what you do with a primary psychopath. You are not going to change their condition because they are, let's, for all intents and purposes, call them a midbrain amputee. The midbrain is there. It's just broken. It's like, look, it's like if you put, put a component in a computer that doesn't really function in the computer. There's no driver for it, okay? You put a video card in a computer and you don't have any driver for that card, it doesn't make a difference. You could plug a screen in. You're not going to have the manifestation on the screen because while the driver may be present, which is what we're talking about in the while the physical card may be present in the computer, which is what we're talking about the midbrain, if you don't have a driver, I don't care what's going to happen. When you turn on the computer, I don't care if there's a card in there, I don't care if you have the nicest monitor, you're not going to display an image because the driver isn't there. So, for all intents and purposes, the functioning between the software and the hardware is broken. That's what a primary psychopath is. So, therefore, again, you can speculate about, what might we do to solve this condition? That's even if you don't want to wrestle with what put it that way to begin with. Like I said, you might find what created that problem in the genome and correct it at an atomic level if we ever get to that advanced level of genetic understanding. Maybe that would work. Maybe you could, again, build some kind of a biofeedback device for the physiology that mimics, through software and algorithms, the normal range of emotions. And I'm totally against putting any technology in the body. I have no transhumanist leanings. I don't want to see anything, like that done to normal human beings. But again, technology exists for a reason, and this is what I would look at as a possible positive use of technology that operates with the physiology. Look, bionic limbs for people who may be an amputee, I don't have a problem with that. That's not wrong. That's the positive use of an advanced technology. Okay? If you're going to give someone a functionality that is there, that they're lacking and suffering as a result of not having there, then fine, do it. And I'm saying this would only be necessary for a tiny fraction of the bulk of humanity. I'm not saying that all the people who are currently psychopathic would need, any kind of a technology put into them to correct that condition. That's not what I'm saying. So don't get it twisted. Okay, I'm saying for the person who is the amputee from birth, the primary psychopath, you're not going to solve this by working with the individual. You're not going to even solve it by changing the conditions they live in. You can go and take a primary psychopath and put them in a Tibetan Buddhist, ashram and have them chant with the Buddhist monks until the day they die, they're still going to be a primary psychopath. They're not going to feel anything as a result of that. It's irrevocably broken. The midbrain of a primary psychopath, barring any kind of physical intervention or interaction through technology, is irrevocably broken and never going to generate human emotion in their physiology. Get over it. Get over it. That's the case. That's true. That exists among us. The end. If you're in denial of that, you yourself have a psychological condition called cognitive dissonance. You don't want to look at what reality actually is. You're ignorant, ignoring reality, thinking you're going to somehow prosper in that condition, which is a psychological pathology itself. So, understand the difference. The primary psychopath has the actual midbrain. There's no driver driving it. Therefore, there is no ability for them to feel. So if humanity got technologically advanced enough maybe to write a driver, quote unquote, maybe we could help those people. But right now, we're not at that level of technological expertise and know-how. Because to be able to write an algorithmic program that would be able to mimic the full range of human emotions would probably take more supercomputing power than all the computers on the earth multiplied by 1,000 times. That's how complex interaction with, the interaction of human emotion actually is. And maybe that's not the point of trying to solve it that way. Maybe the point is that these people just need to be identified and mitigated. They need to be dealt with. They need to be isolated. I would prefer them just being here and being a mild annoyance, and every once in a while when they raise one of their ridiculous, immoral notions, people just brush them off because they're at such a level of higher consciousness, and they say, "You are mad and sick. I feel bad for you that you were born like that, but go away now." And there would be no problem if people as a whole came out of their mock or secondarily psychopathic conditions, started actually caring, healed their own worldview, and decided we're not going to do the bidding of the primary psychopathic animals that are here running things. And that's wishful thinking in many ways, because are there enough people to counteract the psychopath, the primary psychopath? I would say not even close, folks. And if you think there is, I would also say you're pretty delusional, and you're probably on a very new age, bent in life, and you think that things are much, much, much more promising or positive than what they really are. I tend to look at things as a realist and not try to put my hopes and projections on what's really happening, but instead of actually look at what actually is happening, what actually is occurring, hence the name of the show. What on earth is happening, not what on earth I want to be happening. Deal with the reality, the truth as it is, and then make a decision what are you going to do about it. So one of the things that people have termed psychopaths is an interspecies predator. And it's somewhat accurate, but in many ways I wouldn't even use the term interspecies predator. I would simply refer to them as a different species that's preying on humanity. Okay? They lack the actual qualities that allow for human beings as a body of people to live in social harmony. As long as these people are running things, there will never be peace. There will never be social harmony in humanity. This is the problem. And the problem is that we continue to let them rule, that we won't say no to them. The problem is that there's a whole other subspecies of, a subsection of humanity that is doing the bidding of the primary psychopathic animal that is ruling over the body of humanity. They're saying, yes, animal psychopath, I'll do your bidding for you. What do you have for me? You have a nice paycheck for me? Oh, great, I can get my widescreen television. I can get my house out in the suburbs with a 3-car garage and a Lexus. Great. I'll destroy my own people and their future for you, for this other species. I just need a big enough number in my bank account. Let's go. Let's start the work. Unfortunately, that's the animalistic nature that most human beings display. They don't care. They don't care. They're so jaded and they've become so lowered in consciousness through all the food they take in, through all the poisonous media that they watch, the poison worldview that they've taken into themselves, the horrible things that they're willing to listen to come out of other idiots' mouths that has nothing to do with reality. Trivia, inane banter, sports, nonsense, entertainment that has nothing to do with allegory or morals. There's a few things out there that do, try to put the moral tale in with the entertainment. It's a desperate attempt to get people to comprehend allegory, to be entertained by something and then, oh, whoa, I see what he was saying there. It works on so few people. It's not enough. That's not doing enough, folks. It works on too few. I'm not knocking allegorical fiction. I personally love it. But the bulk of humanity is not getting the message. They don't understand something like Dexter. They don't grasp what's being said. They don't understand something like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Harry Potter or, The Walking Dead, another show that's highly allegorical. Because they're the Walking Dead themselves. How are they going to comprehend what's really being said in an allegory? You need a certain amount of brain development. You need a certain amount of psychological development to even grasp what an allegory is, let alone what it's saying to you. So, an interspecies predator is how many people have viewed the psychopath. I, again, almost look at them as an extra-species predator. They're outside of the real humanity. They're not really truly human. There's something else altogether that looks human, but is not. The condition of psychopathy is at the root of the problems in which we find ourselves, and very few people are even talking about it. I talked about a quote on the last couple of radio shows that I was on, that there are more people in the world, adults living in the world, that would rather believe in Santa Claus, that would rather condition their mind to continue to believe in Santa Claus, okay, than there are people who are willing to turn their attention and deal with the reality of psychopathy, particularly primary psychopathy. And there's a reason for that. And not only just to recognize that it exists, but to recognize that it actually, that the primary psychopaths are who is actually ruling humanity as our masters. More people would rather believe in Santa Claus than address that truth. The main reason for that is they would have to wrestle with the uncomfortable implication of why does this condition exist in the first place. And again, I said we'll get into that. Not for today's show, however. I want to go back to a couple more things regarding the psychopath, and then I want to pose a question and open up the phone lines. Psychopathy is not human nature, as some people would lead people to believe. This is just not how people are. Don't be misled into that. Don't be misled by the opposite. The New Age movement doesn't want people to look into this or focus on it, to learn more about it. They don't want you to understand this is who's ruling you, because they're responsible largely for putting a lot of the New Age material into existence, this cult of psychopaths. So, it's very dangerous to ignore this. You ignore it at your own peril and at the peril of your own family, your own freedom. the peril of your own freedom and the freedom of your own family and loved ones. But the opposite, to think that this is human nature, is also just as dangerous and poisonous. Again, tiny, tiny portion of humanity has this in them as a genetic psychological condition, because the midbrain is basically operating without a driver. That's how you can look at the analogy. It's there, but the driver is missing. The software code to actually activate that midbrain is not working properly. You can look at it as not there at all, or maybe infected with a virus. However you want to look at it to make you understand the concept, is fine. Okay, so psychopathy is not just a psychological disorder. This is the other thing that we have to learn. It is not just a psychological disorder. It is also a learned behavior. Primary psychopathy is a psychological disorder that is inherent in the human genome. But secondary psychopathy is a learned behavior. You can actually acquire it over time by taking in the worldview of the primary psychopath. It is a communicable disease as such. It is able to be transferred from the diseased psyche of one person over some time to create disease or pathology in the psyche of another individual. And that's what a communicable disease is. Yeah, it's not an airborne symptom. It's an energy-borne symptom. It is an ether-borne disease. It's not an airborne disease, it's ether-borne. The psychopaths are putting their worldview out into the field of energy around us. And we're latching onto it and taking it on board ourselves, and it's infecting our psyche. So they'll tell you, psychopathy cannot be caught. Yes, it can be caught. It just happens over a long period of time by taking in a diseased worldview as your own. So it is a communicable disease. Again, the psychopath's ability to remain hidden rests with their ability to feign a normal range of human emotions. And that's what allows them to stay well hidden in the places that they operate. Once enough light is cast in their direction, exposing them and their agenda, more people, become wise to their ways, to their methods of manipulation. And eventually, when that's done, a psychopath scatters and their influence becomes negligible in society. To perpetuate their control, psychopaths are always skilled. They're very adept at manipulating other people into thinking that they need them, that they need to continue to do what they're doing in that particular society. Otherwise, the society would somehow collapse into mayhem and chaos. So part of their whole MO is they need to convince you that they're necessary, that their ways are necessary, that their worldview is necessary, and that society as a whole could never survive without them. That's part of their main manipulation tactic. That somehow they perform some vital and necessary service for humanity, and if they were ever to be exposed and routed out, and society would be without them, that total chaos would result. And they're playing on that primal fear of chaos, nested deep within the human psyche, to get people to stand down, not expose them, and not ultimately deal with them in whatever way they need to deal with them to mitigate their influence. Okay? One of the ways that they continue to reinforce this untrue notion, is fear and dependency. Fear and dependency. That's what they want to continuously reemphasize. They want you to always be afraid of something. Always be afraid of something. That's how they can continue to manipulate. If you're afraid, their tactic of controlled opposition, of Hegelian dialectic is also going to work, because this is how they work, through chaos, through the fear of chaos. Okay? And they're going to create chaotic situations in our midst. Once they get people to have a fearful reaction to it, this chaotic event happens and the people have, a fearful reaction has been invoked on the part of the general population, then the psychopath steps in. They want to pose as the savior. They offer their totally self-serving solution that advances their agenda that they already have planned for the very problems which they themselves initiated. Okay? They have one overall objective. They need to make others as similar to themselves as possible. So, they need people to take on their worldview. If people don't take on their worldview, their influence is completely stifled in society because there's so few of them. They need the huge horde of secondary psychopaths to be willing to take on their worldview to do their bidding, or to simply accept reality as their vision of it dictates. They have a vision of reality that they want people to accept is the way things are. And for other people who just don't care, which is a form of becoming secondarily psychopathic, to just say, well, that's the way it is. Nothing you can do about it. And to stand down. Never attempt any change, to affect any change in the world. So many people are in this condition. Let me tell you something. So many people in my family are in this condition. And probably many listeners as well. They don't care that the world is the way that it is. They don't care that there's injustice. They don't care that there are rights being violated constantly around every corner. They look at their worldview is, that's other people's problem. Doesn't affect me. And they're wrong. They're just as wrong as the psychopath is wrong, that they're never going to be brought to justice. They're just as wrong. See, their rule can only continue when we're only focused on our own gain, on ourselves. That's it. When we worship money, greed, selfishness, okay? When we remain in ignorance, even amongst the incredible amounts of information that exists in our world, we don't want to really learn about morality. We don't want to really learn about what rights are and what they're not, what we have a right to do, what we do not have a right to do. We don't want to extend the non-aggression principle to others around us. We don't want to take that into our own understanding and then extend it to all others. And we don't even want to understand that we have a right to defend ourselves against the psychopath. Physically, if necessary. Humanity wants to remain in all of this ignorance and selfishness and self-centeredness and think we can somehow prosper and get out of the control that we're under. And it doesn't work that way. Psychopaths can only be contained when people start refusing to taking on their worldview and being like them in any way. We have to stop basically exuding the same characteristics of the psychopath at a lower level. Until we can get above where they're operating from a place of consciousness, nothing's going to happen. And if enough people can't do that, I would make the very uncomfortable statement that the people who can do that, the small group of people who can do that, then it becomes their responsibility to physically act, to move humanity forward, regardless of what that may mean for them in a physical sense. A sacrifice then has to be made, if you will. And this is exactly what the founders of this country decided. They attempted to deal with the psychopath in the first way that is stated that they can be dealt with. Escape. Go somewhere or leave the psychopath isolated, or leave them where you're at if you can, and you go someplace else. Either isolate them or isolate yourself from them. And that's why a lot of people came over here. One of the reasons. Of course, are there hidden agendas within because psychopaths infiltrated that? Yes. Okay? They had, right from the beginning, that's why they wanted to control people's worldview, that, oh, you can't cross that ocean. They want to put notions out there, oh, that can't be done. They knew it could be all the time. That knowledge was always there and hidden from the people. To cross over to the quote-unquote new world. They wanted to keep that knowledge from them so people would just stay in their tyranny. And then when people said, no, I'm going to make the effort to go over the ocean to the other continent that we know is there, and I don't care what that may mean, how much of a hardship that may be to build up from nothing, we're going to do it anyway because we want to get away from these psychopaths. See, the problem was consciousness still wasn't high enough. They still couldn't really isolate the influence of the psychopath and prevent the psychopath from coming over there. And then when the British decided we're going to come over here with our psychopathic hordes called the British Navy, and the British Army and land troops on the shores of people who simply wanted to be free and to be left alone, those psychopaths came over here. And how did the founders decide to deal with them? How did the people who waged the Revolutionary War against the British decide to deal with those psychopaths? You want to know how they decided to deal with them? They decided to shoot them. That's it. I'm sure they had many a conversation attempting to warn them about the error of their ways. And ultimately, the psychopath, the secondary psychopaths that were the British, serving the primary psychopaths of the crown, would not back down. Because you didn't have enough psychological influence present. You didn't have enough truly morally educated people present. You didn't have enough people truly at a higher level of awareness and consciousness. And so, the only other option that would be available was exercised. And that was to defend one's life, liberty, and property against incursion of violence through the use of defensive force. And to beat physically back their oppressors by whatever amount of force was required to do it. Now, I'm going to open up the phones for the rest of the show, and the question that I want to hear answered from people first, and then we can talk about psychopathy. But this is the question that's going to be on the floor for this show, the next show, and probably the one after it, because I'm going to continue to talk about this dynamic for the next 2 weeks minimum. Okay? Was what the Revolutionary War fighters in America at the time of the American Revolution were their actions acts of hate against their fellow man, or were their actions acts of love for their fellow man? And why do you think that? I'm sure people can easily extrapolate where I fall in this dynamic. What I feel. It's probably no secret. But I would like to know where the listenership is at with this and feel why, and hear why they feel on either side of that dynamic. So let's go to the phones and get your take on this. Here we go. Caller from the 602 area code. I believe this is Ivan in Phoenix, if I'm not mistaken. You're live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, it is Ivan.
Okay. Ivan, let me pose the question to you directly. Do you feel that the actions of the founding fathers of this country and those who waged the Revolutionary War against the British in 1775 and 6, do you feel that what they did were acts of hate or acts of love? And why?
That's kind of, I don't want to say a loaded question, because obviously to start killing, the British is kind of hateful, using violence. But I understand that, yeah, they wanted to be free and have a place for their kind, the people that wanted to leave England, to be free. So that was an act of love, you know, to get out from under that, you know, tyranny. So yeah, it was an act of love. But yeah, I guess it's kind of twofold, that yin yang thing, you know, you have the good with the bad.
We have to make the distinction between were actions already being done to them that drove them to take counteraction. In other words, of course, just killing would of course be a violation of natural law. You know, murder, meaning the initiation of killing, would of course be a violation of natural law. The revolutionaries were not murdering the British, regardless of what anyone thinks. They were not acts of murder. They were acts of defense. Who are the aggressors? Who are the initiators of force? Were the revolutionaries the initiators of force, or were the British revolutionaries of force? In other words, all things being equal, would the revolutionaries who picked up their weapons and fought the British never have initiated violence against the British if they were left alone?
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. If they would have been left to their own, then everything would have been fine. There would have been
no violence. There would have been no usages of force. The violence was initiated by the British. They listened to a psychopath who gave them orders, got on a wooden ships before there were actual, you know, well-made ocean vessels like there are today, with scurvy and disease and all kinds of, you know, poisonous, deleterious conditions on a boat going across the Atlantic Ocean just to oppress people who they never met in their lives, many of them. And we're doing the same thing. The United States, people who call themselves Americans are doing the same thing here to other countries. Listening to the whims of the psychopath who wants to remain in control, getting on a ship or a plane, going to a foreign land and oppressing people that they never met for resources and control. It's a disgrace. It's a total loathsome disgrace that these people should not even be called human beings. They are so vile, and I hold them in total contempt. That's how vile these people are. The nerve of them to think what they're doing is somehow their right. You have nerve, is all I have to say to those people. And I'm talking about the military of the United States. You have nerve thinking that what you're doing is somehow a right on your part, when all you're doing is serving psychopathic interests, just like the British were serving the interests of the psychopaths of the crown, of the king. Okay? Coming over here to oppress people. And then you want to say that when they fight back physically against you, you're going to call them insurgents? You're going to call them terrorists? Well, that's just like saying that the Founding Fathers were terrorists, which is what these psychopathic police training manuals and training seminars want to try to condition and brainwash police into thinking that the Founding Fathers of this country were terrorists for wanting their freedom. Being a terrorist for not wanting to be a slave? Really? You're a terrorist for not wanting to be a slave. And for saying that if a psychopath keeps coming at me and refusing to acknowledge that I am a free human being and trying to make me be their slave, that I have no right to physically defend themselves and kill that person if necessary. They're out of their minds. That is a human right, ladies and gentlemen. And the revolutionaries exercised it. They said enough is enough, and they exercised that right. And they did what was required. They took the secondary psychopaths out, just like we did in World War II. We had to do it again, unfortunately. And I don't look at that as it was a manipulation, yes. You can look at all the ways World War II was manipulated, but to simply stand back and allow the product of that manipulation, called the Nazis, to just take over the world would have been a massive wrongdoing on the part of the people. And we did have to go in there and wage war on these psychopaths. And in a lot of ways now, we're the new psychopaths. We're the new psychopaths. America. We're the new Nazis, waging war on the other countries of the world to try to take their resources and control their people. And this is what the imbeciles, calling themselves soldiers, who have never looked at the truth because they've never worked with themselves, they've never done any psychic cleansing in their lives, and God forbid if they've ever really opened up a book in their life, okay, don't want to look at the truth of, because they don't want to understand that they're the bad guys, because they're secondarily psychopathic, and they've been trained to be. They've been conditioned to be. We talked about that on the show when we talked about the techniques of cults. The techniques of cults used against the military and the police. These are occult techniques that have existed for thousands and thousands of years and are being used to great effectiveness in putting the police and military into secondarily psychopathic conditions, whether they were genetic or primary psychopaths or not. So, there has to come a time when we understand we always maintain the right to use defensive force against people who will not stop coming against our rights. We have a right to exercise what is a right, actions which are rights. People don't have a right to stop us from exercising rights, any more than they have a right to do something to us that is not a right, that is causing harm and is actually a wrong. They have no right to initiate that force. What you need to look at is who is initiating the force, to know who's in the wrong. And then the right always exists for a retaliatory response in the physical. You don't have to engage that response, but does the right exist? Absolutely, yes, it does. If you are walking in open territory and you are accosted, you have a right to defend yourself with physical force by whatever means you have at your disposal to do it. A gun, a knife, a club, fists, feet, anything. Doesn't matter. A broken bottle, a stone, a stick, whatever you have at your disposal. That's your inherent natural law right. Okay? And these psychopaths want to convince you you don't have that right to respond to violence with defensive force. They want to convince you you don't have that right. That they have to act as an intermediary. You need to go to the priest class called the police. That's just like a priest is an intermediary, claims being an intermediary between you and God. The nerve of that claim. A police officer claims to be the intermediary between you and those who would cause you physical harm, and saying you don't have the right to use defensive force, you have to go through us. The nerve, the absolute unmitigated gall of a person who believes they have rights that someone else does not. The right to prevent someone else from using one of their rights to defend their physical body. Imagine. And for those who say I'm getting too three-dimensional, I'm talking too much about physicality here, okay? They need to understand there's no distinguishing between the physical and the spiritual. This is another big lie. Okay? The manifestations that happen on the physical plane are a result of what is taking place in the spiritual domain. So for all in effects, it's just a cause and effect relationship, and they are one and the same. This is the whole problem with religion and science. Religion places the spiritual in a higher context as superior to the physical, and science tries to place the physical in a superior position to the spiritual, and both are incorrect. They don't have a holistic, integrated view that the spiritual domain and physical domain are essentially one and the same through the relationship that they share, which is what all of the great mystery tradition teachings of millennia have been trying to get humanity to understand. So this is a huge problem in the whole worldview of people. They're convinced that they don't have rights that they do. And taking up arms when someone is in oppression is one of our rights. As a matter of fact, the founders really attempted to enshrine it in the founding documents of this country, saying that you have a right and duty to abolish oppressive government. saying that the only thing that they felt was necessary, they used the word necessary one time in the Constitution, a well-regulated militia necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Necessary. Because they knew firearms were for the defense of freedom against encroaching tyranny. And that was their proper use. Firearms are not for hunting. Firearms are not even for just simple home protection or protection for your physical body as you walk among society. That they are ancillary or secondary mechanisms, secondary purposes for the defensive use through weapons. The primary use is so that you have the ability to defend yourself from encroaching tyranny of government. And the founders understood that. And attempting to enshrine the right to use physical force in the founding documents of this country was not acts of hate or acts of terrorism, regardless of what any distorted logic may get people to believe. They were acts of love. They were acts of higher consciousness understanding that freedom is a gift of the Creator and needs to be defended at all times and places, regardless of how it needs to be defended. So I think I want to make it very clear for people where I stand on this issue. The founders of this country didn't murder anybody. They killed people, yes. They didn't murder anybody. The British were the murderers. And, let's not get tied up in where people are from in the world. People from the UK may be listening right now. I'm not talking about you right now. The people who did those acts were murderers who came over here and attempted to oppress the people on these shores. Were not killers. They were murderers. There's a difference between killing and murdering. Murdering, you initiated the force when you had no right to, so it was violence. Murder is a result of violence. Killing can be either a result of violence if it is murder, or if it is not murder, if it is defensive use of force, then it is not murder. It is simply killing someone who would not back down, coming at you with violence. So the distinction is this simple. I'm walking on the street. I happen to be carrying a concealed firearm. Someone comes up to me with another firearm and says, give me all of your property. Give me all your valuables, your money, your whatever jewelry you may have on you, your wallet, etc. And I like those shoes. While you're at it, take those off in their mind too. I take out my firearm and put a hole in them, right through the chest. Done. They're dead. I murdered no one, ladies and gentlemen, as a result of doing that. If you don't understand that, you're under mind control. That was a defensive killing because the other person came at me with violence and the intent to murder. If I did not agree to the usurpation of my will to his will. And therein lies the act of coercion that I have a natural law right to defend myself against. And this is what we're up against in the psychopathic condition of humanity. And these psychopaths want to try to condition us and brainwash us into believing that we may never fight back. We may never actually physically take our freedom. They want to think it can never be done like that. Well, let me give you a pointer here. Let me give you a little piece of advice. That's the only way that it ever has been done. It's never been done any other way. Do you see human consciousness rising to the point before it needs to be done in that way, such that humanity will just suddenly wake up and say, no, my God, what are we doing? We're so wrong. Did the British do that? Were there enough people to convince them of the wrongness of their actions? Did the Nazis do that? Did any other oppressive regime? Did the Russians under Stalin, under Lenin, etc., do that? Did the people today living in the United States? Are the people today living in the United States under the regimes that we're living under today, calling themselves presidencies, ultimately directed by high-level globalist think tanks, the UN and other organizations directing the globalist agenda? Do you see the people rising up in consciousness to say no to this agenda? Do you see massive amounts of military refusing to follow their orders in these illegal wars of aggression? Do you see massive amounts of police refusing their orders to continue to continue to usurp the natural inherent rights of other people? No, you don't see it. I don't see it. I would love to see the evidence of it. I would love people to come forward and bring this evidence forward to me and show me where this is happening at. But I see no evidence of that happening. That's why we have to really understand the reason that we have the ability to use defensive force. If it was never there to be used, we wouldn't even have the capability of doing it. We have to understand that that's a sacred obligation, and it needs to put into effect when there's not going to be any other way to preserve human freedom. Now, that's as controversial as it gets, and I don't really care who's listening. I don't care who's listening. No more than if I was in the Revolutionary War, I would have cared that the Crown was listening. Let me tell you something. The people who put their signature on the Declaration of Independence knew that they were signing their death warrant in that very act. They knew that they were either going to fight and win their freedom, or they were going to fight and die. And that's where we need to get to, ladies and gentlemen. We need to get to that deep of an understanding of human freedom, that it doesn't matter who's going to get it or who's not going to get it. We're going to be willing to act. Take that for however you want to take it. That's the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have on this edition of What on Earth is Happening. Next week we'll continue with this. We'll continue talking about psychopathy and taking your calls on this very important question that goes hand in hand with an understanding of psychopathy and how to deal with it. You've been listening to What on Earth is Happening here on the Oracle Broadcasting Network.